get underway now. So good afternoon to those of you here in Asia. Good morning to those of you here in Europe. I'm Chris Humphrey, the Executive Director of the EU-ASEAN Business Council. Welcome to this latest in our series of webinars looking at the development of the digital economy here in Asia. Today's webinar is entitled COVID-19 and the Digital Transformation in ASEAN. I think we're all seeing every day now that COVID-19 is accelerating ASEAN's pivot towards the digital economy. It's forcing companies and indeed consumers to rethink how they operate, how they buy, sell, and interact with each other. Cutting across all sectors, the pandemic has allowed a rare opportunity for companies to reset. Businesses across the region are putting a relentless focus on customer-centric, data-enabled digital technology to drive productivity, innovation, reduce costs, and enable them to develop their businesses in a more sustainable and modern way. However, despite its best efforts, the region still has a digital divide that it needs to overcome. Now, I think we all know there's been lots of reports and studies done on the potential for the digital economy across Southeast Asia. And even before the pandemic, this is one of the fastest growing regions of things like e-commerce, internet usage, and smartphone take-up. Over the last 3 years, the digital market in ASEAN has expanded threefold and now represents over 7% of ASEAN's total GDP. There are some 125,000 new internet users every day in the region, and within 10 years, the digital economy is expected to add around $1 trillion to the region's GDP. So there's plenty of opportunity then, but also plenty of concerns around issues such as data governance, data flows, ensuring the workforce is skilled appropriately, ensuring that businesses have the right tools to take advantage of it, and making sure, of course, that governments and business can work together to achieve the most out of this trend. ASEAN itself has high ambitions and is working to put in place a number of different framework agreements to help ensure that the opportunity is not missed. So in today's webinar, we're going to look at what the trends are that have been triggered by COVID-19, which sectors have been forced to digitize faster, and how can governments aid businesses with their digital transformation. I'm joined today by a significant, large, panel of distinguished speakers. We have with us Henriette Vaartman, who is the first councillor at the EU delegation to Indonesia and Brunei, based in Jakarta, where she leads on environment, climate action, and digital cooperation issues, having previously been based in India, covering the same sorts of topics there. We have Leong Keng Tai, Director General of International Affairs at Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority, and also concurrently Executive Chairman of the Data Protection Advisory Committee. We have Ang Chin Ta, who is Vice President and Head of Digital Industry Singapore at the Economic Development Board here, and is also Head of the Global Markets at Digital Industry Singapore, which is an alliance between EDP, Enterprise Singapore, and IMDA, with the aim of assisting digital companies grow within Singapore. We have Koh Chern Tuen, who is Chief Operating Officer at SAP in Southeast Asia. SAP, of course, is one of Europe's foremost ICT companies, and here he leads the teams operating right across the region, helping with digital transformation in both the public and private sectors. Johan de Villiers, Managing Director of ABB and also Head of Industrial Automation in Southeast Asia for them, where he's been leading on assisting businesses automate their processes to drive productivity and modernization. And last but not least, Lance Little, who is actually joining us this evening from New Zealand, where it's rather late for him. He's the Managing Director of Roche Diagnostics Asia Pacific, which is one of Europe's leading healthcare companies. And on the diagnostics side of that business, Lance is leading all their activities across the region. Roche, as I'm sure you know, are leaders in the development in new technologies to help with early diagnosis of diseases and help improve patient care and recovery. So some quick housekeeping before we start. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I will try and get through as many of your questions as possible. As Henriette, I'm afraid, needs to leave us a little bit early, I will perhaps start with Henriette as part of this discussion and ask her for her take on the EU's approach to digital transformation and the work that the EU is trying to do with ASEAN in improving innovation and cooperation as well. So Henriette, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I think there's no doubt that this COVID pandemic has highlighted the importance of digital as never before. We are all sitting here in front of our small, uncomfortable screens to prove this. And not only that, but also, I mean, all kind of businesses, administrative services, education, healthcare, cultural, creative activities, and communications really has been forced to shift to different media, I would say, in a very short period of time. And I think the most important trend that has happened over this time is that all this development that was already underway has been accelerated. And I think things that we thought were not possible a few months back has proven to actually suddenly be possible. And that's, for me, something that is quite important. So then I would just like to talk a little bit about what we in the EU, how we have looked at this inside the EU, because I think as a regional cooperation entity, I think there's a lot to be learned and to share also with. And I would think there, I mean, this crisis has really been forcing us to test all our strengths and shortcomings in the world, and some are 4 of them actually. First of all, data. So we have an objective to create a European data space, a single market for data, where there's more and more high quality data available and data that can be reused, while of course keep making sure that businesses and individuals are also in control of the data that they generate. So in order to facilitate this, we are developing a legislative framework on data governance that will help put all the right structure in place to handle this. And we will also work on strengthening and establishing trusted and safe and secure European cloud capacities. The second big thing is artificial intelligence, where we will take action, the European Commission will take action to create an ecosystem of excellence and trust around artificial intelligence in Europe. And this will, there will be a proposal out on this at the beginning of next year. The third parameter is linked to increased connectivity, in particular through the deployment of 5G. So during the COVID lockdown, the internet traffic, as you surely all know, made a leap from 20 to 50%. Well, a major share of the economy and society shifted to digital, and I think that's that we all know that. So we really need to relaunch also investments in connectivity, and then related to a fairer and easier business environment. So because we have all been sitting in lockdown in our different places across the world, and some of us still do, we have been forced to shift a lot of our shopping and other things, other needs to the internet, and this has required a new business model, and we need to continue to develop that, and that's something that Europe is focused on to make sure that that both people and businesses benefit from the opportunities, I would say, that this trend has offered. Of course, all of this we will not do in isolation, because the internet and the digital world does not have any external borders. So this is not a trend that is happening only inside the EU, but it's something that we also are working on with all our partners and those who are like-minded and see these developments in the same way that we do. So let me stop here for now.
Thanks, Henriette. Perhaps just one quick follow-up to you. Can you talk a bit more about any practical cooperation that's going on between the EU and ASEAN when it comes to digital economy or digital transformation?
We are working on, I would say, in many different aspects of this. We're working on issues related to connectivity in all types of all understandings of that word, and of course also digital connectivity. So there are practical cooperations ongoing, and I think this will be strengthened much more in the time to come.
Okay, thanks very much. Jinta, I'll come to you next. I think you perhaps can give us some insights as to the sorts of trends that EDB's been seeing in the digital space during this pandemic period, and also some of the work that you're doing to help businesses develop and adapt and change.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here today. There are 2 trends that we see. First of all is maybe to our surprise, investments into Singapore continue unabated during this time. We were very concerned, and specifically for the digital economy, it remains a bright spot within the Singapore kind of like economic landscape. So we see companies like Kojima, Jivalden, PayPal, Twitter continue to build out their teams in Singapore. So that's the first trend we're seeing. It's a bit contrary to expectations. We're happy it's happening. The second one is really why. Why are they continuing to choose Singapore during these difficult times? First of all, of course, we have some of the fundamentals that we have built out in Singapore over the years, being business friendly, being stable. But the stability here is specifically to creating a very stable vantage point for these companies to look into new opportunities in Southeast Asia. So Chris, as you mentioned earlier in your opening, the opportunities really abound. And I just wanted to reference some figures I recently came across, published by Bain and Facebook just some weeks ago. And I think the number of digital consumers in Southeast Asia by the end of 2020 will reach 310 million. That is the size of the United States. This number was projected to be reached only in 2025, but because of the pandemic, everyone has gone online, not just individuals, but also enterprises. So I think there are a few implications of this that in particular companies as well as governments might want to take note of. First of all, has people gone online, has companies gone online, they need to transact. So we're seeing an explosion of fintech and payment services, in particular startups. So example that I'll leave with all of you is that we had expected that because of the pandemic, maybe the fundraising scene in Singapore would be a bit more muted in 2020. But as it turns out for fintech, there's an uptick. So $240 million was raised in the first half of 2020 for fintech in Singapore. That is a 19% jump from the same period in 2019. So that's one that I think people are going online to transact. And related to that, to make sure that companies are able to handle some of these transactions, these new business models, everyone needs to upskill. Small and medium enterprises need to improve their capabilities as they go online to sell to a new customer set. So that's the other thing that we're seeing, and the Singapore government is paying close attention to this. We've set aside $2 billion to make sure that our workers are able to participate in this new digital economy. That has always been a trend, I want to emphasize that, but has been brought forward ahead of schedule. The last point I'd like to make, and I think this is something that we have seen very strongly throughout 2020, is that as a in response to some of this demand or stronger trend or acceleration towards digitalization, we are seeing that companies are adopting an ecosystem or partnership approach. So in fact, some of my panelists here, like SAP and ABB, have helped us along this way. They have worked with their own ecosystem of partners and vendors. The government in Singapore has also worked closely with the private sector to make sure that we're delivering the right skills, the right capabilities to the ecosystem and the economy during this time. So I'll just stop here for now. Thanks, Chris.
All right, thanks very much. King Tai, perhaps I'll come to you next, because I know that SMEs are, of course, a big part of the economy in Singapore and across Southeast Asia as well. Can you talk about some of the help that IMDA are providing to SMEs here in Singapore, and indeed, perhaps also how other parts of the region can learn from the Singapore experience in that?
Well, let me start by saying that, transforming SMEs through digital technologies has always been a challenge, not just for Singapore, but I think for many countries, developed or otherwise. Because many of the traditional SMEs really do not see the need to adapt to a digital transformation. But I think with COVID-19, many of them were caught by the impact, because suddenly they have zero customers, zero walk-in customers. They need to implement things like safe entry management. There's pressure to go cashless and also contactless payments. And many had to suddenly overnight to try and go online, do delivery of sales. So this is really a big change for many of the SMEs, and something which I think they, as well as all of us, did not foresee that it will come upon all of us so quickly. So what Singapore has done is really, I think we see this also as an opportunity to accelerate the transformation of SMEs. So for example, we set aside 500 Singapore dollars has been allocated to support businesses in their digital transformation. Another example is also that, for the longest time, we've been trying to get micro enterprises, like hawkers, small retailers, to get them to go digital. So we took the opportunity of this pandemic to really try and step this up much more. So in fact, we set up what we call an SG digital office, primarily just to help drive this national movement for digital transformation, and recruited something like 1,000 what we call digital ambassadors. And we, over the short span of 3 months, we managed to help some 18,000 storeholders in hawker centers to adopt e-payment solutions. So this is just one example. But I think going forward, all of us cannot really do this in a local context. I think we also, as we sort of get used to, not say get used, as we adapt to the COVID-19, I think we also should start to think about how we can collaborate, how we can move forward regionally and also globally. So in this aspect, Singapore has been trying to work out things like digital economy agreements. So we have one that is done with New Zealand and Chile. And I think we need to do more of this as we gradually get out of COVID-19, as we recover. We need to start to prepare how we can restore trade, but maybe not more in the digital domain now, because as countries become more digitalized, the new way of trade will also have to recognize things like cross-border data flow, have to recognize things like facilitation of e-payments, e-transaction. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that area, and I think this kinds of work is not confined to any particular country. I think this is where regional cooperation, regional collaboration makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I quite agree with you on that. Perhaps before I turn to the private sector and try and get some of their views, a question for you, King Tai, and Chintar rather, and also Henriette, is how can we put in place more of these cross-border multilateral digital agreement type arrangements, particularly when it comes to things like data flows? Because for business, being able to flow your data across borders, of course, becomes much more critical in the current climate as well. And it's a key area, but we do see some governments in the region, here in ASEAN at least, looking to keep data onshore. I don't know who would like to have a go at that one for me.
Maybe I'll just start off, because I think this is part of the work that I've been doing within ASEAN. You're right, and I think Henriette also talked a lot about the importance of data, and it can only become more critical in the new digital environment. And I think with this increased reliance on data for many of our daily activities, there's of course some rise in concerns over things like privacy, security, what happens when it's transferred to different jurisdictions who may have different practices in protecting data, etc. So this is not just a regional ASEAN thing, but I think, of course, EU has developed things like GDPR, APEC has developed things like CVPR, etc. So within ASEAN, we have started the conversation amongst the ASEAN countries. In fact, last year, the ministers have sort of endorsed what we call an ASEAN Digital Data Governance Framework. And in there, I think are several key components, one of which is how do we facilitate cross-border data flow within ASEAN. But actually, on a longer-term basis, the goal cannot be just intra-ASEAN data flow. The goal must be to ensure interoperability when data flows between ASEAN and, say, EU or ASEAN and APEC. And I think this is the sort of the goal of this particular project that we're working on in ASEAN. We're happy to talk more if there are specific questions on that.
Thank you, and I'm glad to see you're saying the same sort of things that we said in a paper we wrote earlier this year on data governance as well. Cool, I'll come to you. Working at SAP, which is also a leading provider of digital services across the region, both for the public and private sector. Can you talk more about some of the trends you're seeing, and indeed some of the requests you're getting about digital transformation, helping businesses through this period and helping them get the systems back in place to allow them to trade and develop their businesses going forward?
Yeah, definitely. There are two main trends that we have seen, right? As far as digital consumer is concerned, I think Chinta mentioned the exponential growth in number of digital consumers. But on the B2B side, we have seen a huge increase in focus in value chain resilience. And I think that there have been studies that cited, on average, over the course of a decade, about half a year of profit is usually wiped out on average because of supply chain disruption. And a lot of our clients, and we work with even companies like ABB, with Roche, supply chain is critical. The problem is more than half of the business executives have been reported that they don't have clear visibility into their supply chain beyond their tier 1 suppliers. And to us, part of the answer lies in leveraging the network economy. In fact, a couple of months ago, and this is a true story, right? In March or April, so one of my colleagues based in East Coast of US, that was when Trump imposed the travel ban and New York is shutting down. And one of our clients, they are a construction supply company, and they are helping a contractor to build a temporary hospital. And guess what? My colleague got a call from this client of his. I need to secure 500 hospital beds, and there's no stock. And so happened that at that time, we opened up our trading network. We run a trading network. We do about $4 trillion worth of transactions, goods and services a year. So right at that time, we opened up the network, complimentary access to anyone in the world. And my colleague and his client got into the system. Within 30 minutes, they secured 500 hospital beds. And there are stories like that all across the world. We have seen exponential increase in adoption of network to diversify your supply chain, to sell, to find new suppliers and new customers to sell to. And we believe that trend is irreversible. And the key thing now is how to get SME on board, because after all, with COVID, SME is the hardest hit. And I can speak a little bit more later on because we are working very closely with our clients, our partners, and the Singapore government to get SME on board.
Thank you. And Johan, I think from a more perhaps a bigger manufacturing industrial point of view, for ABB, what sort of trends have you been seeing, and what sort of requests are you getting from your customers around increasing automation and helping them with connectivity issues?
Well, the short-term immediate need from all our customers is to keep operating. And if you can't have specialists traveling to sites, remote connectivity becomes very important. So we saw this jump in acceptance of testing equipment, factory acceptance testing, remote support by remote, shipping VR headsets to sites, and then we can connect and see what the guys see on site and help them and support them. So, and I think there's a change there that's permanent, that this acceptance of specialists supporting sites, often remote sites, that could be a ship, it could be a pulp and paper factory in the middle of the jungle in Indonesia. That acceptance of remote support is really there and locked in. I think that's the way things will continue. On the little bit longer term, we definitely see this battle for supply chain resilience, and it means that a lot of the manufacturers look for flexibility. They need to adjust their manufacturing lines to accommodate different raw materials, to prioritize, to switch even product. So a lot of the manufacturers, I mean, it's very interesting to see in this whole coronavirus time how the demand for industrial robots have picked up, which again I wouldn't have predicted that right at the start, but there is a significant increase in interest, and we see that in our order books, and which is quite an amazing trend. So, and I think that's specifically in Singapore, because there has been a lot of groundwork done, a lot of preparation has been done in terms of automation, in terms of skilling the workforce, creating awareness. Also for digitalization. I mean, digitalization is absolutely key to create visibility, to make informed decisions. So digital adoption. I would say the final trend that we see is sustainability. There's a much greater awareness of sustainability, and especially our large companies, big process industries are really locking in and driving for doing more with less, looking at alternative energy sources. And again, to make the right decisions, digitalization is absolutely key. So extracting data from plants, understanding where the low-hanging fruits are, the best opportunities are, this is a key opportunity where we can help our customers to do that.
Okay, thanks, Johan. And Lance, I'll come to you now. You're working in the healthcare sector for a very large European diagnostics firm. A lot of focus, of course, on healthcare during this entire COVID-19 pandemic period. How is it transforming your business? Are you seeing a lot more need for faster connectivity and more use of digital tools in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think for us, this COVID pandemic has been, like being in the fire of healthcare and then moving into the white hot furnace. We at Roche Diagnostics, we're key to delivering COVID tests, so we're in the heart of it. And I think if you look at the agility mindset that was adopted by the organization, I mean, within a little over a month, we had commercialized our first high volume test. Since then, we've got a total of 13 tools in the healthcare field to help clinicians manage this COVID pandemic. And that doesn't happen just by people doing stuff faster. I mean, typically it takes 2 to 3 years to develop a test, and we're talking about months now. And that happens because we utilize digital tools, information that was already existing in the organization, and leveraging it differently, looking at it differently. And I think this is a learning that will stay within the organization. I'm not suggesting we'll be able to build tests in 30 plus days on a regular basis, but one of the things that we've had to do in order to deliver to the global need has been really rethink the way in which we manufacture, the processes that we use to assess and analyze failures. So if you consider that the manufacturing lines, and I'm sure we've ordered a lot of ABB products because we use them in many of our manufacturing lines, has gone up on a scale from 10 to multiple 100x that we need to deal. And before, we're still waiting on manufacturing lines to be delivered to us to meet the global demand now. We're 8 or 9 months down the road because these things don't get built in 5 minutes. In the meantime, our manufacturing lines that we do have are running 24/7, no breaks. They were never designed for that. And so using the data that's coming off those systems to work out when we're likely to have failures. So a lot of internal data elements can be done to allow us to scale and manufacture at rates you could never have imagined or planned. The other element is the digital tools that we push out into the marketplace. So if you look at COVID specifically, and I'll give 2 examples. COVID is overwhelming intensive care units. It's a respiratory disease primarily. What that means is intensive care unit nurses, highly trained nurses who are inundated with patients, need to take an arterial blood gas. That is not something that anybody can do. It's not taking a blood test. You need a highly trained staff to do that. What we did was one of the products that we launched was a digital tool that essentially converts a venous blood, which many people can take, trained phlebotomists can take. It's a much easier sample to get than arterial blood gas, but converts that patient's information into an arterial blood gas equivalent result. So that allows highly trained nurses to focus on what they need to do and not take samples. So that's an example of a digital tool that was rolled out specifically for COVID. Now, on the other side, we've got to remember that healthcare continues. We're totally focused on COVID because this is a health-related pandemic that is collapsing the world, which is a bit unusual for us. However, the other health dynamics continue. People still need surgeries. Cancer patients still need their treatments, et cetera, et cetera. If I use cancer as an example, with hospitals shut down, doctors couldn't come together and do what they call tumor boards. So they come together and they discuss a particular patient, the latest information, and what it is that should be done. One of the tools that we have is what we call a molecular tumor board, and we can run those digitally. So even if doctors were sitting at home, we could deploy this tool, and the patient still got the same level of care that they would have had everybody been sitting in the room. So there's a couple of examples where we've used digital tools that were, if you like, there but COVID has accelerated their need. And I think this is a theme that some of the other panelists have highlighted as well. We're still in the white hot furnace and continue to work with whatever tools we can to get production up. That's our primary objective at the moment, is to get the various tests out into the hands of the people that need it. So COVID has absolutely had an impact on us as Roche Diagnostics, no question. And I would say it's forced us to adopt mindsets and thinking that will remain and be valuable for us moving forward.
Thanks, Lance. One of the questions I posed at the very front end was how can governments and businesses work better together when it comes to digital transformation, to make sure that the whole ecosystem, be that the regulatory system or the connectivity system or just the skill sets, are all going to be there for the future as this digital economy keeps growing. So perhaps I'll ask our friends from the public service first, Chinta and Keng Tai, perhaps you can just give us your view. What sort of things do you really want from industry, both big and small, to help really drive home this digital transformation going forward? So it's not just a COVID-related thing, but it's something that can really grow and take off to help Singapore and the rest of the region.
Thanks, Chris. So I think the keyword here is how do we make this sustain beyond COVID? Because we all agree this is something that has fundamentally changed the face of operations for a lot of companies, but it's also beneficial, right? So I'll cite maybe just a couple of examples. The Singapore government, through the Infocom and Media Development Authority, has worked extensively to upgrade and upskill, first of all, Singaporeans. We've set aside that budget, but we work with companies to do so, to make sure that the skills that we're training up among our Singaporeans are industry relevant. So for example, Google announced a couple of weeks ago a skills ignition program, which will train 3,000 Singaporeans in digital skills. IBM has announced something similar, has companies like C and the like, right? So this is great, and we welcome these partnerships because the government is not in the business of doing business. However, we are in the business of making sure the environment is friendly and our workforce is ready. So that's one. The other thing that we have worked extensively on is to make sure that our SME sellers, and I noticed there's a question about SMEs as well being asked in the Q&A, that they understand how to go online. So the IMDA and the Enterprise Singapore have worked extensively with the e-commerce platforms like Amazon, Lazada, and the like, to make sure that people understand not just the front-end selling, but also the back-end transaction, that their employees are ready as they go and plunge into this uncertain kind of like a new future, right? The last one I'll raise is a little bit different. It's to do with manufacturing. And this is a sector that's very important to Singapore. It's about 20% of our economy today, hiring about 200,000 individuals, which is around the same size as the entire ICT sector as well. So very, very important. We have worked with industry partners such as Tusud, Siemens, as well as McKinsey to put together the Smart Industry Readiness Index, which is a tool or framework that allows companies of all sizes, from your global foundries to your smaller manufacturing outfits, to determine at what stage they are in terms of their digitalization journey. And this is then like a point or framework system that allow them to identify the gaps they need to work on. And it also creates a common language for them to start thinking within the boardroom of these companies, but also with their partners to think about where they should invest. So I'm very proud to say that this has been very well received. 350 companies have undergone this assessment or used the SIRI SIRI index, and it has been adopted by the World Economic Forum just last week as a global standard to see how far along manufacturing entities are in terms of our digitalization journey.
Thanks. Keng Tai, I mean, it's all well and good Singapore doing lots to help its own companies here and drive its own digital ecosystem, but as you're covering international affairs at IMDA, I mean, how are you going to work with your partners around the region and elsewhere in the world to help with this? And here in Singapore, we need a bigger market than just the Singapore market.
Yeah, I think many of the issues, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's really not local. It's a lot of it is actually international or even global. So one example, and some of these examples actually highlight the need to engage between the public sector and the private sector. So one example is that, we have this framework for ethical use of data and AI. I think this is a good example that government cannot just sit down and develop such a framework. So in fact, there's extensive engagement. In fact, I think the group that sort of looks at this is really a very strong partnership with different parts of the private sector, from industry, from academics to the legal fraternity, and of course with the public service. And Singapore managed to sort of launch this also at last year's World Economic Forum. I think the other parts would be how we make policies. And again, on a broader aspect, it's not just local policy. So the example I gave earlier about the ASEAN data governance framework, which is really at the ASEAN-wide basis. Again, that framework was developed not just amongst senior officials of ASEAN, but actually there were also consultations not only from Singapore industries, but also from industry in the ASEAN region. So these are, I think, some of the examples that actually more and more governments need to partner very tightly and strongly with the private sector to develop policies and to move forward some of these sort of leading edge technology issues.
As you just mentioned, before I go to my friends from the private sector, as you just mentioned, the ASEAN Digital Framework Agreement, or framework, one question on the Q&A from Tan Sri Munir from ASEAN back in Malaysia is, will that framework become a binding agreement in ASEAN? He does also, of course, then make the point that there are binding agreements in ASEAN, like a TIGA, which aren't particularly being followed by all the member states. So can you give us any insight on that?
Generally, I think data protection, cross-border data flow is quite complex because many countries, not only in ASEAN, but in the Asia-Pacific area, not everyone has a data protection authority. So in ASEAN, Singapore has, Malaysia has, Philippines has, Thailand, Indonesia is about to do that, and the others are also in the process. So we are at a state of transition where data may flow between a country that has data regulation to another country that has not. Then I think in this case, there's like really no legal framework, and therefore I think the short answer to that is that at this stage, you can only have binding agreements between countries that have a data protection authority. But that is not to say that that is the end of the story, because I think just like in Europe and in APEC, many people are talking about what we call model contractual clauses. So even at the commercial level, between a company in country A flowing data to another company in country B, there are already requirements for data protection clauses in those agreements. So what we are trying to do is try and standardize some of these clauses so that a company or an SME need not jump through a lot of hoops, spend a lot of money, legal fees to try and negotiate and all that. If countries can come out to say that, okay, these are the set of, this is template, so to speak, for data flowing between my country and your country, then I think it makes life much easier for many of the companies operating across borders. So I think this model contractual clauses is part of the feature of what we are trying to do at the ASEAN level, because recognizing not everyone in ASEAN today have data protection authorities.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I'll turn back to Core, Johan, and Lance. So you're all operating big businesses across the region. You've all got various different degrees of digitization going on and supporting your customers as well. But what would the three of you like to see more from the governments here in Southeast Asia in terms of helping drive digitization in your various different sectors? In fact, Core would like to go first on that one.
Sure. I think I would say we would like to see two things. One is the continual facilitation of data flow and trade, especially digital commerce. And I think that is what ASEAN and especially in particular the Singapore government is doing pretty well. In 2 months from now, in the Singapore FinTech Festival, we working with the Singapore government and a few other partners are going to showcase a meta hub connecting multiple marketplaces, SME marketplaces, small, medium enterprises marketplaces, so that an example I'd like to give my colleague is, if I'm a restaurant owner in Bangkok and I want to buy extra mangoes, and there are Alfonso mangoes in India, Alfonso mango traders, you know Alfonso mango, right? It's pretty nice from India, right? And how do you connect a restaurant owner in Bangkok and Alfonso mango traders in India such that they can trade? And SMEs, they don't know each other. There's no such public facilities for them to connect. And in this case, this is a classic, private-public partnership, because we are working with the government, multilateral government bodies, private sector partners, we are one of them, to connect and let them discover each other in an automatic way. So that kind of program, I believe, is worth encouraging, and it won't be possible without the data governance and cross-country data flow agreement that King Tai mentioned, and it won't be possible without an open government, a sandbox environment where governments are encouraging innovation without cumbersome, regulations, and that is what the government of Singapore is doing pretty well, and we expect to see more in ASEAN.
Okay, thanks. Johan, support you might want from governments to help drive your business and indeed help you help others?
Yeah, well, for me, the number one thing is people are our greatest asset. That's hands down. I mean, with such an amount of technology and possibilities available to us, and in the industrial space, domain expertise is absolutely critical. It's very difficult to solve problems with only hard skills. I mean, you can be a data analyst, but if you don't understand oil and gas or pulp and paper or pharma manufacturing, you're absolutely no use. You're not going to solve any problem. So I think this investment in people, education, making sure that we continue to transition that and evolve that as the technology evolves and as business practices evolve. I think soft skills are in tremendous demand. Entrepreneurial thinking, problem solvers. One of the things that digitalization brings is actually, there was a time when everybody's looking for a data analyst, but today you can access data analysts from anywhere in the world, and that you can bring in those skills to solve your problem. You don't need to have that on the ground, but in front of the customer, you need someone that can understand the problem and come up with a solution. And I think countries that do that best, and Singapore is a great example of that, will win and will have, lock in the ability to add value and solve problems and get rewarded for that. So people and investment in people is number one. Second, I think large companies get it and they are really driving this technology adoption, but small and medium-sized enterprises, they are hard to get to. And there we need to team up with government. And again, I think there's some great practice in Singapore with Siri and many other things that do help to create awareness of what is possible and the value that digitalization and general technology adoption can bring to smaller companies. And that's, I think, where the biggest piece of value is that we can unlock very quickly if we can get that right. And then, of course, cross-border trade is important. If you really want to unleash the full potential of digital, that has to be possible. So many of the customers operate in multiple countries, so that's super important. Creating ecosystems, I totally believe in that, and I think that is a part where, again, we have to team up with governments and work together to do that. And my last one is just cybersecurity will continue to be a big topic in industry. That is a massive topic for many customers to place data in the cloud. And I think the more trust that can be established in a geography, you really see that follow. So the more safe a destination or a geography is perceived to be in terms of digital, the more investment comes and the more customers will be ready to accept and place digital centers in a specific location. So again, a very big plus for Singapore, and we need to get that done across the region to unlock the full value.
Thanks, Johan. And for you, Lance, you've been working in the health sector where things like data and issues are always at the forefront of your minds. To help you develop your businesses further, what more are you looking for from governments from your point of view? And if you don't mind, also on the Q&A, actually is a question about, are you working more with smaller platforms going forward?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll try and tackle both of those then, Chris, and I'll keep it brief because I think Cora and Johan just articulated many of the things that we say as well. I mean, we've touched on supply chain earlier in the discussion. Investment in people is absolutely key. the ability to bring experts into our various environments and grow local people around those experts is very, very important. One of the things that we do a lot of work with APAC Med is around the regulatory alignment across countries. So from a healthcare perspective, how do we ensure, or how do we minimize the repeated work that needs to be done, given that every country has their own regulatory space? Is there a better way to do this? Can we harmonize? Can we trust the information that one country has created around testing a particular product and accept that in another country such that it can be put in the hands of clinicians safely with the right standards much quicker? And that we're working with APAC Med, and we've at APAC Med we've created a white paper describing this fairly recently as well, very specifically around data, and Johan touched on it as well, and it is around I think cloud enablement. If we look at healthcare, healthcare information, it's said that healthcare information doubles every 73 days, right? So the ability of a single doctor to understand all there is to know about a particular disease or a frame of diseases that he or she is responsible for is simply impossible. So the use of digital tools becomes more and more important. But the power lies in being able to connect that information to give insights outside of a singular border. Wouldn't it be, I used the example of the Navified Tumor Board earlier on, where we're able to still manage patients with cancer by using a digital tool. Now that digital tool is designed to sit in the cloud such that say a patient with certain symptoms can be compared to patients in other countries with similar symptoms. As a simple example, now imagine that patient in Indonesia benefiting from the oncology experience that exists in the United States. If we can open the borders up, for example, and I may have used two bad examples, but if we can open the borders up to acceptance of tools that connect across borders, then patients are going to do much better from the global knowledge that exists. And I think that's one thing that is particularly around the digital space that we would ask. To switch gears a little bit and answer the question that's put up there, the short answer is yes. We do connect with startups, and in fact at Roche Diagnostics we have what we call a Creosphere program, which started off in Munich, and I'm duplicated it in Singapore actually for the Asia environment, and I'll probably do another one up in North Asia for China and Korea. In Japan, whereby we look for specific use cases that we're trying to solve. We reach out to startups that may have technologies, and we have a mechanism of bringing them on board and taking them through to help develop their product in conjunction with us, that we can then hopefully make a difference to patients out there in the world. So the short answer to that is yes, we do.
Excellent, great. That leads me to another question on the Q&A, which is about SMEs and perhaps the poor take-up rate for some SMEs for new digital tools. So perhaps I'll ask Ken Tai first of all on this one, and maybe Chintan wants to chip in, but also our other panelists. How can we help SMEs, particularly the micro ones, really get on board with new digital tools? Is there things that perhaps some of the bigger businesses can do to help as well as governments in terms of assisting them?
Well, I think the challenge has always been for the really small ones. You're talking about few people running a food stall or things like that, or a small retailer. To them, really, I think before the pandemic, frankly, it's a bit hard to sell the case, because of course it involves spending money and all that. But I think COVID-19 has brought about this, if you like, a forced realization that life after COVID may not be the same, and therefore they cannot carry on doing the way they used to. So because of the pandemic, many of them have gone on to doing online orders, cashless payments, delivery, etc. So, and I think this model will carry on even after the pandemic, because now there's a new mode, new revenue source. And I'm also not that sure that even after COVID, you'll be exactly the same as before. In other words, I think there'll be new habits formed. So basically, I think in the past, to be fair, really is a hard case to sell to the really small ones. but today they realize it. And I think because many governments have also stepped up, including Singapore, to try and help them through this transition phase, I hope that they will carry on with this mode of operations even after COVID.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Cool. I mean, SAP's does a lot of stuff with SMEs. So are you helping get them onto your platforms more and more?
Definitely. In fact, I see that the collaboration is not only between companies like us and SME, or even governments and SME. There are also large companies that realize the benefit of digitalizing their ecosystem. Let me give you an example, right? So in Vietnam, we work with a client, Vin Group, which is a very large, one of the largest conglomerate. And as you know, in Vietnam, in rural area, 90% of their fast-moving consumer goods are sold through mom and pop shops. And in the midst of COVID, this company, Vin Group, announced an initiative. They are trying to digitalize the entire value chain, the B2B to C value chain of 300 mom and pop shops. And you can see examples of that, especially with family-owned conglomerates, working with tech companies, banks, telcos, to digitally enable entire ecosystem. So I think I've seen a new way of working together in ecosystem, apart from the usual startups and public-private partnership. And we are pretty much involved in many of these partnerships as well.
Thanks. We're running close to the end. There are a couple more questions on the Q&A, and I'd like to take them both. And I think perhaps the first of them probably goes to Chin Ta, I think, because it's all about developing the digital space in the health sector in Singapore. The question actually is, can you share any plans around to implement digital health in Singapore's hospitals and health institutions? Or indeed, develop perhaps a digital ecosystem for the health sector in the country?
That's a really difficult question, and I'm really hoping that Lance can also weigh in. I think from my perspective, what we always want to focus on are the fundamentals. The fundamentals has some of my panelists have already mentioned are people. So we want to make sure that they have the right digital skills, that they're aware of the opportunities. This is about as far as the government can go, by the way. We don't want to force people to do things that don't necessarily make too much sense. I think it's up to the individuals to take that time, to have the aptitude, the attitude to want to learn. So they want to pick up some of these digital skills. I also had a quick reflection on a point that Johan raised earlier about the importance of soft skills. So I actually think with all the emphasis on digital skills, those are important, but soft skills are going to be really the differentiator going forward. Technology is going to help us do a lot of tasks. So what is the domain or the soft skills, what some people call the right brain skills, right? They're going to help you design product, create a good service experience, and innovate, right? So I think where the government will focus a lot of their attention on is getting the fundamentals right around skills. And hopefully, entrepreneurs and companies such as Roche will get involved and spark off some of these commercial opportunity. I can tell you for a fact that the government is very invested in trying to transform our healthcare system. An entire office has been set up to look at that, led by Dr. Tan Cho Chuan. He's an individual who was formerly the president of NUS and also our chief health scientist. I think this is a top priority for the Singapore government. However, it is not an easy process. And we do want to engage very closely with the private sector to get some of these things going.
Okay, thanks so much. Anything you want to add to that, Lance?
Just to build on it, and we're absolutely aligned as most of the people in the healthcare space is the challenge with healthcare, and Chin Ta, you mentioned it just right at the end there. This is not easy. Understanding that, whenever you bring tools into the healthcare space, if you get it wrong, you don't have an upset individual whose app doesn't work when they park their car. You have potentially somebody who dies as a result. So
absolutely,
the stakes are extremely high in healthcare. That's why the development is somewhat slower than you may see in other industries. And the trick is to find this balance between speed of development to help patients at the end of the day and making sure that we keep them safe during the course of that process. So this is the challenge. We do know that there is a huge amount of data and information in the healthcare space. A lot of it can't be used. But there is a lot that can, but it's disconnected. And so the trick is, how do we build tools that actually give insights that allow clinicians to make better decisions? And this is the focus that Roche has moving forward.
Thanks. We're getting close to the end. I've got one last question for all of you, and perhaps you'd like to go in turn to answer it. And that really is this upward trend in digitization that we've been seeing as a result of COVID-19. Is it sustainable, and how do we make sure that it is sustainable going forward? Perhaps I'll ask Cor to answer that one first, if he doesn't mind.
Well, my obvious answer is it is definitely sustainable. There is a recent report released by McKinsey just in October this month. In 2017, 5 out of 10 business executives surveyed said they look at technology as a source of savings, cost savings. Fast forward to today, only 1 out of 10 look at technology as a source of savings. So I think the trend is irreversible. And that includes my favorite durian stall as well, because whenever I visit them now, they are busy selling durian on Facebook. They don't have time to talk to me.
Can you give me the address of the stall after the Thanks. Johan, from your point of view, particularly as you're working in much more in the manufacturing industrial sector, I mean, how sustainable is it, and how can we make sure that it is sustainable?
Well, Andrew had made the comment right at the start that there was trends in place even before COVID started that I think has been accelerated. Many of that is sustainable and will continue. Are we moving at the pace that we should in ASEAN? I don't think so. I think we still need to accelerate. There's a huge opportunity. And I think my key message would just be, if we don't lead this change, we'll be forced to change. And I think there's a great opportunity to lead. So that proactive adoption across the board, I think we still have a few hoops to jump through. There's some work to do.
Thanks. I think ensuring more proactivity at the ASEAN level is a debate for a separate webinar one day. For the health sector, it's going to keep on going in this route.
Yes, and I would echo that. There was pressure on digital change within digital disruption within health before COVID. That's been accelerated. I think so for me, much of the elements that are in play are sustainable. The more important question for me, though, is, are they systematically applied? I think we are seeing examples, and some very good examples, of use of digital tools to improve health. We're seeing many other examples that are perhaps not adding value. The challenge for the healthcare environment is to systematically adopt the right tools and ensure that they are built into standard of care for the future. So for me, the question is not about sustainability, it's more about systematic sustainability.
Okay, thanks. And lastly, to Chintar and Keng Tai, I mean, Singapore is investing a lot in terms of institution and putting the right ecosystems in place to support digital economy here in Singapore. So what more can we look forward to perhaps from Singapore, both from an EDB and an IMDA point of view? Perhaps Chintar, you want to go first, and we'll finish with Keng Tai.
What we hope to do is to continue to build a great and vibrant tech ecosystem in Singapore. There's the right fundamentals that companies and people want to connect with, so that they can understand and explore opportunities for Southeast Asia to begin with, but also in the larger Asia Pacific region. So to do so, we will lower the barriers. We'll continue to create some of these digital economy agreements, DEAs, that Keng Tai was talking about, which in my mind serve as APIs to connect companies based out of Singapore with opportunities in the broader ASEAN and Asia Pacific region. So these are some of the things that we want to do in the environment, but I really hope, and my hope is that digital technology is a way to kind of unshackle Singapore from our physical constraints, right? Because it is not tied to kind of like geographic destiny. It is about business opportunity. It's about people. It's about making things kind of like move forward. So very excited about the future. But then again, we're optimists at EDB.
I'm pleased to hear that. And Keng Tai, from your point of view, what more is IMDA going to be doing going forward, particularly also in your international relations to help digital economy?
Well, first to add my point about the sustainability, I think it's not a question of whether it's sustainable. I think everyone really doesn't have that choice. We have already moved on into this aspect. We're driven into digitalization, and I don't think there's going back. And therefore, I think one of the things that maybe you have read much more in the papers nowadays is the mention of digital economy, everything digital. And in fact, this buzz phrase in Singapore, right? How do we emerge stronger using digitalization, using digital technology? So I think this is really a recognition that it is time that we all should start to think, how are we transiting out of COVID as opposed to dealing with COVID so much? I mean, there's still many lessons learned, but it's about time to see how we can emerge out of this pandemic. And I think digital technology and digitalization will be a key major part of this strategy.
Okay. Thank you all of you for joining us and having this great discussion today. I think we could probably talk for a lot longer. Thank you again to our audience for joining in and for the questions that were raised. We have our business summit coming up soon at the EU-ASEAN Business Council on the 19th of November. There's a further panel there on digital economy as well. So please go to our website, find out more details on that, and you can log on for it. I'm currently off to Challenger to buy a new laptop and sustainably dispose of my one in the recycling bin downstairs. So thank you all of you very much again, and please keep safe, keep well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.